There's a shadow that falls over the human soul when it steps into the light of power. We've all seen it happen. A leader who once championed the people becomes a tyrant. A manager who was once a friend becomes a cold, distant boss. It's a transformation so common it almost feels like a law of nature. But why? What is it about gaining power that seems to fundamentally rewire who we are? Today we're going deep into the psychology and the neuroscience of power to find an answer. If you're ready to confront one of the darkest mysteries of human nature, make sure you're subscribed and let's start this investigation together.
So, let's start with the most famous warning ever given on this subject. It's from the historian Lord Acton, way back in 1887. And this has pretty much become our default explanation, right? It suggests that power is like some kind of external poison, an agent that just inevitably degrades a person's character. For more than a century, this has been the accepted wisdom.
But is that really the whole picture? Is Lord Acton's famous line the final word on it? I mean, does power change us from the outside in? Or is it more like a key that unlocks something that was already there, hidden deep inside our personality all along? This is the central question we're going to explore. Is power a corrupter, or is it a revealer?
To start finding some answers, we have to look at one of the most notorious and controversial experiments in the entire history of psychology. It's a study so infamous that it's completely shaped how we think about situations overwhelming the individual. Okay, so picture this. It's the summer of 1971. A psychologist named Philip Zimbardo builds a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University. He gets 24 male college students who are all screened and found to be psychologically totally stable and healthy. Then, with just a flip of a coin, they're randomly assigned to be either a guard or a prisoner. The goal, he said, was to see what happens when you put good people in an evil place.
And what happened next? It was terrifyingly fast. The guards started becoming cruel, sadistic even, using all sorts of psychological manipulation and humiliation. The prisoners, stripped of their identities, just became passive, depressed, and emotionally broken. The whole thing escalated so violently that the experiment, which was supposed to last 2 weeks, had to be shut down after only 6 days. The conclusion seemed undeniable. Maybe our capacity for evil isn't a personal flaw, but just a product of the situation we're in.
For decades, the Stanford prison experiment was treated like the final word on the matter. It was proof that the situation, not the person, determines how we act. But it turns out the story we've all been told is built on a very flawed foundation.
See, in 2001, the BBC ran a similar experiment, but with much stricter ethical rules. The results? Completely different. The guards just couldn't get into their roles. They were hesitant and failed to act like a cohesive group. The prisoners, on the other hand, they banded together, challenged the guards' authority, and eventually overthrew the entire power structure. This flew directly in the face of the idea that people will just automatically conform to their roles. So what really happened at Stanford?
Well, later analysis revealed some major flaws. Zimbardo wasn't just a neutral observer. He acted as the prison superintendent, and he actively told the guards to create a sense of powerlessness in the prisoners. So the participants weren't acting naturally. They were performing the roles they thought the researchers wanted them to play. On top of that, just volunteering for a prison study might have attracted people who already had more authoritarian tendencies. So the experiment didn't really show that situations make people evil. It showed that leadership and expectations can. The true nature of power was still a mystery.
Okay, so if the situation isn't the whole story, we need a different way to think about this. And that brings us to the work of social psychologist Dr. Keltner, who has this fascinating and honestly kind of tragic theory that gets us a lot closer to the truth.
Kellner argues that, contrary to what we might think, lasting power isn't usually taken by force. It's given to us by other people. We rise up in social groups because we're empathetic, we're collaborative, and we focus on the greater good. But here's the paradox. The very experience of having power starts to erode the exact skills that got us there in the first place. The qualities that help us gain power are the very first casualties once we have it.
Think of it like a cycle. You start by genuinely helping other people, and that earns you influence and power. But once you have that power, the psychological experience of it causes your empathy to take a nosedive. Your focus shifts from we to me. This leads to impulsive, self-serving actions, the abuse of power. And of course, that abuse eventually destroys your reputation, and the group takes back the very influence they gave you. It's just this tragic, self-defeating loop.
But why? Why does having power just shut down our empathy? The power paradox describes what happens, but to understand the mechanism, we have to go even deeper. We're moving from social psychology right into the physical wiring of the human brain.
So inside all of our brains, we have this network of cells called mirror neurons. These things are basically the foundation of social connection. When you see someone smile, your mirror neurons related to smiling fire up, which lets you understand and even share that feeling. When you see someone in pain, your mirror system resonates with that pain. This system is the biological hardware for empathy. So how do we actually know that power affects this system? Well, there was this brilliant experiment by a neuroscientist named Sukhvinder Abi that gives us the answer. First, he primed people by having them write about a time they felt really powerful or a time they felt powerless. Then, while they watched a simple video of a hand squeezing a ball, he used TMS, which is a non-invasive magnetic pulse, to directly measure their brain's empathetic resonance in real time.
And the results are just stark. There's no ambiguity at all. The group that was primed to feel powerless showed a really high level of resonance. Their brains were strongly mirroring the action on the screen. But the group primed to feel powerful, their mirror system activity was significantly suppressed. The feeling of power physically turned down the volume on the part of their brain that connects them to other people.
Now this effect gets magnified by two other core brain systems. The behavioral inhibition system, or BIS, is what makes us sensitive to threats and social rules. Think of it as the brain's brake pedal. People without power tend to operate from the system, but power activates the behavioral approach system, the BAS. This is the brain's gas pedal. It's all about rewards, goals, and self-interest. So power is simultaneously cutting the brakes and slamming on the gas, driving us toward our own goals, often without any regard for others.
So that's what the science is telling us. But you and I both know this isn't just something that happens in a lab. It shapes our world every single day, in our offices, in our communities, in our politics. Where have you seen this power paradox play out in real life? Share your own observations in the comments below. We love to hear them.
And what's truly profound here is that this neurological tendency doesn't just stay inside an individual's head. When it scales up across society, it creates these predictable, almost lawful patterns of social organization that we've seen throughout history.
About a century ago, a sociologist named Robert Mitchells proposed what he called the iron law of oligarchy. He argued that any large organization, no matter how democratic it is at the start, will eventually be ruled by a small elite. And why is that? Because the very process of leadership creates a class of individuals whose brains, as we've seen, start to rewire, and they become a psychologically separate group with their own interests at heart.
And when this process is left to run unchecked in a single leader, it can actually manifest as a recognized condition. Lord David Owen, who was both a neurologist and a politician, identified what he called hubris syndrome. It's an acquired personality trait that shows up after a person has held significant, unconstrained power for a long time. The symptoms are a direct reflection of the brain changes we've been talking about: recklessness, losing contact with reality, and a profound contempt for other people. It is the pathology of absolute power.
So after digging through the psychology, the neuroscience, and the sociology, what is the final verdict? First, and this is so important to understand, the change that happens under the influence of power is not, at its root, a moral failing. It's not about a good person suddenly turning bad. To look at it that way is to completely miss the fundamental mechanism at play here.
Power acts as a neurological agent. It is a biological switch that literally reconfigures the brain. It physically dampens the neural networks that are responsible for empathy. And at the exact same time, it supercharges the systems that are all about pursuing goals and taking action. In essence, power trades our social awareness for uninhibited effectiveness.
So if we think of power as an anesthetic, something that numbs our ability to feel for others, the real question becomes, what's the antidote? The research seems to hint that when power is framed not as a personal privilege, but as a responsibility to other people, some of these negative effects can be held in check. But is a conscious sense of duty enough to overcome our own biology? That remains the ultimate question for anyone who dares to lead. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this analysis valuable, please give this explainer a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the human condition.